So the stages of faith is proposed by James W. Fowler, and it gives us insight into human development and how we are shaped by our cultures, whether that is formed by a religious organization, a complete lack of faith or religion, and just our spiritual experiences, what we connect to at an early age, and how that informs us and what we continue to do that's spiritual. So he explains the stages of faith in 7 steps. Stage 0 reflects on Erickson's theory of trust versus mistrust. It describes how somebody at a very early stage will either trust their environment because their parents are consistent and attentive, or they may experience mistrust if they're met with inconsistency and neglect. And then stage 1, children can now use language, and they often view symbolism. And I kind of interpret it with like at a young age how you're like watching a lot of like cartoons and movies, and you just don't have that ability to see what's real and what's not. Stage 2 is the belief that good things will happen to you if you do good things in return. There's an example in the book with an older woman. And so there's an emphasis on justice and fairness, and verses are taken very literal, like in the Bible. And people will begin to conceptualize God and what he looks like and that imagery. So, stage 3 has to do with a lot of community. Within a religious system or a set of very rigid beliefs. There's a little bit of that conflict with what is right, what is wrong, and trying to decipher that. Stage 4 I think of as like the jump after stage 3, and there's kind of more of an open-mindedness and nuance. Stage 5 has moved past conventional religious beliefs. A person can acknowledge others' perceptions and beliefs. Stage 6 is rarely achieved. I think of it as Maslow's hierarchy. The very top of the pyramid triangle is self-actualization. And so in this stage, the person has deep levels of compassion and deep understanding. How the reading affected your personal thoughts regarding faith or spirituality. I think the reading added to other theories as discussed with Erikson and Piaget. Like the theories discussed in human behavior and social environment, they reflect on human development. I think the stages of faith built on kind of stuff that I had thought about a little bit, but not extensively. And it was able to really articulate things that I hadn't thought of prior. One thing that I hadn't really thought of prior was the community aspect of religion and how people really bond, and it gives people more than even just religion, just like a community to go to and just a really great sense of social support. Um, I think I think it would be really difficult for someone to leave church or be excommunicated when they're losing their social supports. I think it's important to validate people where they are in the stages versus kind of, as clinicians, impose our beliefs that they need to readjust when, they're not in danger. And that's kind of when our biases come in. Like if we kind of are meeting with somebody and we might be internalizing like, oh my, like they're not like as developed as they should be, or something along those lines. Like that's our implicit bias coming in, and that's kind of when we need to challenge those beliefs. Possible issues related to transference or countertransference. I think countertransference would be a bigger issue since the client would be ideally talking about themselves and I wouldn't be talking about myself unless explicitly asked to, and we have differing views, and then that I guess would be considered transference. I usually kind of feel countertransference when people are on like extreme opposites of the spectrum. When people are like very religious, and I might internally think that it's like kind of like cultish behavior. I usually think they're just super naive and closed-minded. And then on the very opposite side, when people usually align themselves with like atheism and they're just very closed-minded and rigid as well. It just feels a little narcissistic to me that it's like you would be just so certain about something. So I guess both ends are just extremely rigid and judgmental a little bit too. So that's kind of when I feel countertransference. However, throughout the course, when I have readings or when, other people may be talking, that usually doesn't happen, but I kind of feel a little bit of that bias or that kind of annoyance a little bit. I'm able to identify it better in my body if I feel that physical tension, or I just start to get annoyed again. I have to challenge my thoughts and just be very cognizant of that. So that's been helpful. I think this would be very helpful in social work. I think in medical social work, this would be very valuable, especially when clients are dealing with something that could be like fatal, like to their family or friends or whatever, and the social worker needs to find like a clergy or like a priest to connect them with if they are religious. I think that'd be very helpful, and I think in a clinical setting it would be very helpful as well. But I think it's just important to meet a client where they are at and not impose our beliefs or where we want them to be. Just make sure, and if you are going to explore that with them, make sure you're not being judgmental and just be cognizant of some of the language that you're using. So if they're like very happy and like good with it and there's no imminent danger to them, it'd be really inappropriate to kind of interfere with that, because then there's that mistrust now, and the client might not return and just feel very judged. However, I think there was an example in class of I think it was a lesbian being part of like the Catholic religion, or I guess any religion, and they're kind of expressing conflict with what they believe versus like what the church believes and its ideology. So I think that would be a really good point where you could kind of gently guide them and start asking questions and kind of make sure that the person, they could still be getting like both. It's not like this either or situation, and they still have that sense of community that they are probably just so comfortable with and they don't want to lose. And also be able to express their sexuality and live free with that. And both things, I think, are possible to coexist. And so try not to have that black and white thinking. And then aside from that, I think it's also just good to know general information about others' beliefs. Our project exploring a religious organization that we're not aware of, I think that's a really good idea, and just everyone talking about it has just been very informative so far. And I think it's just really good to also like emphasize the good in every religion and non-religion, and and also to just be aware of why someone might be in the stage 3 thinking and how they feel connected and they feel like they're part of a group and it helps them. So yeah.